Rain still clung to the pavement when I first saw her. My new neighbor, the woman everyone whispered about as HOA Karen, standing across the street and photographing my house. I didn't know then that her quiet snapshots were the beginning of a battle that would shake everything I thought was safe. Subscribe. Stay with me, because justice doesn't arrive gently. It arrives exactly where ego stands tallest that morning. The sunlight slowly crept across the damp pavement, turning the leftover rain into a golden shimmer. It felt like the first true beginning of my new life. My wife, Ayla, had finally moved in with me after years of waiting, and our home felt alive with a sense of hope. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost staged in its quiet perfection. But behind that soft silence lived something rigid, a force that controlled every hedge, every mailbox, every breath. The HOA. As Ayla placed her first box on the porch, I felt a slight shift in the air, as if unseen eyes were already judging us. Across the street, a woman stood with a red folder tucked under her arm. She wasn't hiding her stare. She scanned Ayla from head to toe with a cold, administrative precision. That was the moment I realized who she was. The infamous HOA Karen. The woman whose life seemed to revolve around rules, warnings, and complaints. The moment our eyes met, she quickly looked away, scribbling something down. Ayla hadn't even stepped fully into the house, yet it felt like some silent violation had already been recorded. That was the first sign that our welcome here wasn't going to be simple. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint, and the floors echoed softly under our footsteps. Ayla walked through each room with a smile that carried years of longing. "It finally feels real," she'd said earlier, and despite my attempt to match her excitement, a trace of unease lingered inside me. I pushed it aside, convincing myself it was only stress from the move. "Everything will be fine," I told myself. But deep down, something about Karen's stare, silent yet piercing, had cracked the peaceful illusion of this new beginning. By midday, we were halfway unpacked. I stepped outside to park the car and caught sight of Karen again, this time on her phone. She kept glancing at our house while gesturing sharply, as if reporting coordinates rather than concerns. I brushed it off, assuming she was complaining about yard debris or trash placement, her usual HOA specialty. But from behind the curtain, Ayla watched her with growing discomfort. The breeze carried a strange heaviness, as if the neighborhood itself was warning us that something unwelcoming had awakened. As evening approached and the light dimmed, the last thing I expected was the flash of blue lights bouncing across our windows. A police car rolled to a stop in front of our home, its presence slicing through the calm. I opened the door to find two officers standing there, professional but curious. Someone had reported an illegal occupancy, and an unauthorized resident move-in. And of course, the report came from Karen. The shock drained the color from Ayla's face. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was escalation. The officers stepped inside, inspecting each room with a routine, almost bored professionalism. Their expressions made it clear they didn't see anything remotely unusual, yet procedure required them to follow through. Ayla stood silently in the living room, breathing unevenly, as if the walls were closing in. I realized then how quickly a home could stop feeling like a sanctuary. When the officers finally said, "Everything seems normal here," it offered no comfort, because the damage done wasn't legal, it was emotional. The moment the officers left, the neighborhood seemed to shift. Curtains moved. People slowed down as they passed by. Whispers formed in small clusters near mailboxes. The weight of judgment, the unspoken kind, pressed against our windows. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, a notepad in hand, watching us like a security camera with a pulse. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was the beginning of a personal crusade, and we were the target. Ayla looked at me and whispered, "What did we do wrong?" The question drifted through the room like smoke, clinging to everything it touched. I had no answer, not one that made sense. The street outside carried a strange tension, like the static before a storm. I reassured her that we had done nothing wrong, that truth would stand on its own. But in my chest, doubt flickered. The kind of doubt that comes when you realize someone is determined to find fault, even if none exists. Night settled in, but rest didn't come. I walked to the window and saw Karen again, this time walking briskly toward the HOA office with a stack of fresh papers. She wasn't just filing a complaint, she was building a case. And for the first time I wondered why. Was it control? Bias? Or something more personal hidden beneath her rigid exterior? Whatever it was, her persistence made one thing painfully clear. This wasn't ending tonight. When I finally lay down, the house felt heavier than it had that morning. Ayla's eyes were tired, her hopes shaken. Our home, the place meant to shelter us, had become a battlefield before we'd even settled in. I closed my eyes with a single thought echoing through me. This is just the beginning. The real story, the real fight, had not yet revealed itself. And something deep inside me sensed that whatever was coming next would change more than just our relationship with the HOA. It would change how we understood justice, truth, and each other. Later that week, the neighborhood seemed to move with a different rhythm, a rhythm I could feel more than hear. The air carried a quiet tension, like a held breath waiting to be released. Ayla tried to settle into the house, arranging the living room, placing small decor pieces she had collected over the years, but even her gentle touch felt overshadowed by something looming. Every morning, the sound of Karen's footsteps on her porch echoed sharper than before. She watched our house not with curiosity, but with the cold patience of someone convinced she would uncover wrongdoing. Her silence spoke louder than any accusation. Ayla had started avoiding the front windows. Each time she passed them, her shoulders tightened, as if expecting another police car, another confrontation. I reassured her, but reassurance doesn't protect the heart from invisible wounds. That afternoon, a thick envelope appeared in our mailbox. HOA inspection notice, stamped urgently. The wording inside was clinical, but the intent behind it was personal. Karen claimed our home had unauthorized modifications, improper residency documentation, and non-compliant porch items. None of it was true. But for HOA boards, truth is often irrelevant. Paperwork is their battlefield. I could feel the noose tightening through printed lines. I attended the next HOA meeting hoping logic would ease the situation. The room smelled of old carpet and stale coffee, and the long rectangular table seemed too small for the tension sitting on top of it. Karen sat at the center seat, posture straight, lips pursed, papers perfectly aligned. When my case was mentioned, she leaned forward like a judge ready to deliver a sentence before hearing testimony. The other board members barely looked at me. Their eyes flickered between Karen's expressions and the printed allegations, as if waiting for her cues. It was clear. Power wasn't shared in that room, it was obeyed. As I spoke, explaining how Ayla was my legal spouse and not an unauthorized occupant, I noticed Karen writing something rapidly. Not notes, but corrections, rebuttals, counterpoints she had likely prepared long before I arrived. She questioned trivial details. Move-in timing, vehicle registration, exterior decor alignment. It wasn't about violations. It was about control. And beneath that control was something else. Personal irritation that couldn't be explained by rules alone. When I left the room, the decision wasn't final, but the message was. Karen wasn't inspecting us. She was hunting. And her hunt had only just begun. Back home, Ayla waited anxiously. She asked how the meeting went, and though I tried to soften the truth, the frustration in my voice gave me away. Ayla's expression shifted from fear to something deeper, a kind of hurt that comes from realizing you are being targeted for reasons that make no sense. She kept the house spotless, followed every guideline, read the HOA binder as if preparing for an exam. But no amount of compliance can protect someone from a person determined to find faults. I saw her spirit dim a little, like a candle struggling against a draft. Days passed, each filled with new letters, warnings, and photographic evidence. Karen documented everything: a misplaced recycling bin, a flower pot Ayla hadn't centered, even the shadow of our tree falling slightly beyond the property line. None of these were actual violations, yet each arrived with escalating tone: final notice, immediate review required, potential penalty. The neighborhood watched quietly, some with sympathy, others with indifference, but no one intervened. HOA conflict had become entertainment. And in that silence, Ayla's steps grew quieter, her laughter less frequent, replaced by the constant awareness of being monitored. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the street in muted orange, I found Ayla sitting on the couch with her hands tightly clasped. She didn't need to speak, everything she felt was visible. "Why is she doing this?" her eyes seemed to ask. I didn't know. Sometimes people aren't driven by logic but by insecurity, by the thrill of power, by the comfort of control. The HOA had given Karen authority, but somewhere along the way, She had mistaken it for ownership, not of property, but of people. And Ayla had unknowingly challenged that. That night, a new letter arrived, this time marked, mandatory hearing. The HOA wanted Ayla present for questioning, to verify residency compliance. It was humiliating. My wife, a professional, respected in her field, was now being treated like she was trying to sneak into her own home. When she read the letter, something inside her shifted. Not fear, resolve. Her posture straightened, and her breathing steadied. For the first time since we moved in, I saw a quiet fire in her eyes. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a line crossed. And Ayla no longer intended to stay silent. The day before the hearing, Ayla reviewed every document. Marriage certificate, lease paperwork, HOA guidelines, even state housing laws. Her preparation wasn't frantic. It was focused, deliberate, the way someone prepares not just to defend themselves, but to expose wrongdoing. While she worked, I stepped outside for air. From across the street, Karen watched again, arms crossed, satisfied, confident. She believed tomorrow would be the moment she put us in our place. But Karen didn't know the truth. She didn't know who Ayla really was. She didn't know the profession my wife had mastered for years. She didn't know what was coming. As night settled in, the weight of tomorrow hung thick in the air. Ayla sat beside me, calm yet sharp, her determination stronger than any fear Karen could manufacture. She looked toward the HOA building in the distance, where her hearing would be held. A simple thought passed through her eyes. Let the truth come. And for the first time since the ordeal began, I felt a shift. Not in the neighborhood, not in Karen, but in Ayla. She was no longer the target. She was preparing to become something else entirely. Something Karen would never expect. Something Karen should fear. The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in a gray, muted stillness, as if the sky itself held its breath. The neighborhood was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that exists before a significant shift, a quiet that listens. Ayla walked beside me toward the HOA building, her steps calm, purposeful. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She moved with the confidence of someone walking toward truth, not judgment. I noticed how the cold air didn't shake her, how the weight of Karen's accusations no longer bent her shoulders. Something had changed in her overnight, something strong, rooted, and unmistakably unafraid. Inside the HOA hall, fluorescent lights hummed faintly above a long wooden table where board members sat in a formal, almost theatrical arrangement. At the center of it all, Karen positioned herself upright, a stack of documents arranged with surgical precision. Her expression carried the satisfaction of someone expecting a victory. When Ayla entered, the board members looked up with polite curiosity, but Karen's gaze sharpened, almost startled. Ayla didn't shrink under the attention. She stood still, composed, her presence filling the room in a way no accusation could diminish. I realized then that today wasn't just a hearing. It was a turning point. The board began reading Karen's report. Every line felt exaggerated, stretched, or twisted: non-compliant residency, failure to provide documentation, HOA violation patterns. It was a list built not from facts, but from obsession. As each item was recited, Karen sat taller, her certainty growing. But Ayla remained expressionless, her calmness almost unnerving. She listened not as a defendant, but as someone waiting for a misunderstanding to reveal itself. The papers on her lap were neatly organized, but she hadn't touched them yet. She didn't need to, not yet. Her silence felt deliberate, patient, and far more powerful than any argument. When Karen finally finished, she leaned back with an air of accomplishment, the faintest hint of a smile tugging her lips. She believed she had cornered us. She believed today would validate her power. The room turned to Ayla, waiting for her defense. But instead of responding immediately, Ayla first observed the board members, studying their faces, understanding their roles. Then she asked, with quiet authority, for the HOA bylaws to be read aloud. There was no hostility in her request, only precision, the kind of precision used by people who understand systems deeply. The board complied. As they read, Karen's expression stiffened, sensing the shift. Ayla finally opened her folder. The rustle of paper sounded sharper than the fluorescent hum. She laid out documents that contradicted each accusation: legal identification, marriage certificate, move-in approvals, correspondence records, everything in perfect order. But she didn't stop there. She pointed out inconsistencies within Karen's own filings, dates that didn't match, claims unsupported by visual evidence, phrases taken out of context. Her tone remained calm, almost gentle, but her words were knives wrapped in silk. The board leaned in closer with each detail, their earlier alignment with Karen quietly unraveling. Karen's confidence wavered. She reached for her notes, flipping pages hastily, searching for a counterpoint that wasn't there. Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. She tried interjecting, but Ayla's reasoning kept dismantling each claim before Karen could rebuild it. The room no longer belonged to Karen. It belonged to clarity, and Ayla was guiding it. I watched from my chair, stunned by the grace in her strength. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was simply truthful, and truth, when spoken with such composure, was louder than accusation ever could be. Then came the moment everything shifted. One board member asked Ayla how she understood HOA policy so thoroughly. Ayla paused for only a heartbeat before giving an answer that left the room frozen. She calmly explained her profession. She was a legal adjudicator specializing in housing and community regulation compliance. She didn't boast. She didn't emphasize it. She simply stated it as fact. Yet the weight of that fact landed heavily. Karen's eyes widened in shock. The board straightened. The air thickened. The person Karen had been trying to educate on HOA rules was someone who had spent years interpreting policies far more complex than this neighborhood handbook. Karen's composure splintered. She grasped for authority that had suddenly abandoned her. Her voice, once firm, now carried tremors as she attempted to defend her motives. She claimed she was ensuring compliance, protecting community integrity, upholding standards. But the words fell empty. The board had already sensed the truth. Her actions weren't procedural. They were personal. Ayla sat silently as the board questioned Karen directly, pressing her on her reasoning, her evidence, her timing. For the first time since we moved in, Karen wasn't the one in control. She was the one being examined. Ayla finished the hearing with a quiet statement about fairness, transparency, and the responsibility that comes with authority. She spoke not as someone defending herself, but as someone reminding the room of the purpose behind rules: to protect, not oppress. There was no bitterness in her tone, only sincerity. When she concluded, a stillness settled over the room. The board thanked her, genuinely this time. Their deliberation was brief, almost ceremonial. They dismissed all claims against us and announced that an internal review of Karen's conduct would be initiated. It wasn't just a decision. It was accountability taking form. As we stepped outside, sunlight broke through the gray clouds, scattering soft light across the walkway. The weight we had carried for days lifted subtly but unmistakably. Ayla walked with the same calm she had entered with, but now it carried a quiet triumph. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed power to win. She had only needed truth. Karen stood near the entrance, stunned, her authority cracked open. She watched Ayla with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and something else, realization. The woman she had tried to intimidate was the very person now presiding over the review of her actions. The shift had begun, and there was no turning back. The days following the hearing carried a different kind of silence, not the heavy, suffocating quiet of fear, but a steady, watchful stillness, as if the neighborhood itself was adjusting to a change in gravity. People who once glanced at us with caution now looked away from Karen instead. The energy around her house felt unsettled, like a place standing in the shadow of consequences. Ayla moved through our home with calm confidence, returning to her routines as though reclaiming space that had been temporarily stolen from her. The storm wasn't over, but the wind had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The HOA board initiated their internal review quickly. Observers from a regional compliance office were brought in, people outside Karen's circle of influence. Their quiet visits, clipboards in hand, added a new tension to the neighborhood. Karen's porch, once a command post of scrutiny, became unusually quiet. She spent mornings inside, blinds half lowered, watching from behind the slats instead of standing boldly in the open. Her presence had shrunk, compressed by the realization that she was no longer the one doing the observing. Now she was the one being observed, and that shift echoed across every corner of the community. Yet the strange thing about pressure is that it doesn't always break immediately. Sometimes it coils inward first. Karen began filing smaller complaints against unrelated neighbors. Minor issues, easily dismissed. It was as if she was trying to remind herself she still had influence. But the board members approached each new complaint with caution, their posture different, their questions sharper. Without her usual audience, Karen seemed unsteady. The foundation she had built her authority on, fear, control, and compliance, was weakening. She walked slower, her shoulders less rigid. For the first time, she seemed unsure of her own power. Meanwhile, Ayla received a formal request from the board. They wanted her to assist in reviewing certain HOA cases, her professional background making her uniquely suited. Their tone wasn't demanding, it was respectful, almost grateful. She accepted, not out of pride, but from a sense of responsibility. She understood that fairness required participation, not distance. Every morning she reviewed files at our dining table, sunlight casting warm patterns across neatly organized documents. I watched her move through this role with the same grace she carried in the hearing room. She wasn't seeking authority. She was restoring balance where it had been lost. In one particular file, Ayla noticed a pattern. A series of excessive fines and warnings all issued by Karen over several months. None had sufficient evidence. Some lacked even the most basic procedural steps. Ayla's expression didn't change, but her attention sharpened. These weren't mistakes. They were abuses of authority that had gone unchecked. The more she reviewed, the clearer the pattern became. She compiled the findings quietly, methodically, her posture steady. This isn't just about us, she thought. It was about every person who had been silently affected by decisions made from personal bias rather than fairness. When the board reconvened, they invited Ayla to present her observations. The room was different now, the atmosphere no longer weighted by one person's control. Ayla's voice was measured as she outlined her findings, connecting each irregularity with the appropriate guideline. The board listened without interruption, their faces shifting with realization. Karen sat at the end of the table, hands clasped tightly, her carefully constructed confidence unraveling. Each documented inconsistency chipped away at the facade she had maintained for years. And Ayla never looked at her with hostility, only with clarity. Truth didn't need aggression. It only needed light. As the review deepened, neighbors began sharing their own experiences. Small stories, quiet encounters, unexplained finds, all pieces of a puzzle that had long been hidden in plain sight. The board collected statements, comparing them against policies. Patterns emerged like silhouettes behind fogged glass. Karen's authority had not been leadership. It had been unchecked dominance. The realization spread through the board with silent shock. The woman they once trusted to uphold order had instead created chaos wrapped in the language of rules. The shift was no longer subtle. It was structural. And Karen felt the weight of it with every passing minute. One afternoon, I walked past Karen's house and noticed her sitting on her porch, not with a clipboard or camera, but with her hands clasped together, staring at the ground. For the first time, she looked human, not intimidating, not commanding, just lost. Her world, built on control, was collapsing inward. And though her actions had caused us pain, the sight stirred a strange mixture of emotions in me. Not sympathy, but understanding. When power is built on fear, losing it feels like losing identity. The consequences she faced weren't revenge. They were the natural return of what she had put into the world. The HOA board scheduled a final evaluation meeting, one Karen could not influence. This time, she was the one being questioned, not about us, but about her conduct. The board reviewed her decisions, her documentation patterns, and the impact she had made on residents. Ayla sat quietly among the advisors, her presence steady, her role impartial. She wasn't there to win anything. She was there to ensure fairness. Karen's responses grew fragmented, defensive, contradicting her own reports. The truth was no longer a matter of interpretation. It was visible, undeniable, standing plainly before everyone in that room. That evening, as we walked home, the neighborhood lights glowed softly against the darkening sky. Ayla's steps were unhurried, her expression grounded, peaceful. She hadn't gained power, she had restored balance. The air felt lighter, as if a long-held tension had finally begun to loosen. But the story wasn't over yet. The board still had one final decision to make, and the outcome would not only shape Karen's future, but define the integrity of the entire community. The stage was set, the truth laid bare. And as we approached our home, I felt it clearly. The final chapter was approaching. The morning of the final HOA meeting arrived with a rare, quiet stillness. A soft breeze moved through the neighborhood, carrying with it a sense of anticipation. Not fear, not tension, but the feeling that something long overdue was finally approaching. As Ayla and I walked toward the community center, the sunrise cast warm gold against the windows, illuminating the pathway like a gentle invitation toward closure. 4 days, the board had examined Karen's conduct. 4 days, truth had peeled back the layers of her authority. Today wasn't a trial. It was the final unveiling of everything that had been hidden beneath her power. Inside the meeting room, the board members were already seated, their expressions composed but attentive. The air felt different, steadier, more neutral. Karen sat at the end of the table, shoulders rigid, fingers intertwined in a grip that betrayed her anxiety. She looked smaller than before, stripped of the certainty she once carried like armor. Ayla sat among the advisors, maintaining the same calm presence she'd shown throughout the process. She wasn't here as an opponent or a victor. She was here as a witness to fairness. The atmosphere hummed with the weight of unspoken truths ready to surface. The board began by reviewing their findings. Their voices were measured, unemotional, focused only on clarity. They outlined repeated procedural violations, unsubstantiated fines, personal bias influencing reports, and improper targeting of residents. Patterns that could no longer be dismissed as oversight. With each statement, Karen's eyes lowered further. Her confidence, once so unshakable, had thinned into silence. She attempted to interject twice, but her explanations stumbled, contradicting both policy and the evidence before them. 4 years, her authority had gone unquestioned. Now, under the light of accountability, it dissolved piece by piece, revealing the fragility beneath. Then the board presented testimonies from residents. Some spoke of warnings that had made no sense. Others shared the fear of unknown fines appearing without conversation. Many had remained silent for years, believing there was no point in opposing someone who seemed woven into the structure of the HOA itself. But once Ayla stepped forward and truth gained momentum, courage multiplied. The board listened carefully, their expressions shifting from concern to resolve. This wasn't a single mistake. This was a pattern, one that had shaped the community through quiet intimidation, and now it stood exposed in full. When the board invited Ayla to speak, she rose with the same steady grace she had carried from the very beginning. She didn't criticize Karen. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she spoke about the purpose of community governance, how rules were meant to protect, not punish, guide, not intimidate. Her words carried weight not because of authority, but because of truth. She outlined how transparency strengthens communities, how fairness restores trust, and how responsibility must remain anchored in integrity. As she finished, the room grew still. She hadn't advocated for punishment. She had advocated for healing. The board stepped away briefly to finalize their decision. The silence that followed was heavy but expectant. Karen sat motionless, staring at the polished surface of the table as if searching for a version of herself she no longer recognized. I watched her carefully. There was no triumph in me, no satisfaction in her fall. Only reflection. Her actions had hurt us, but now, stripped of the authority she once clung to, she looked like someone confronting the weight of their own choices. Sometimes justice doesn't break a person. It simply removes the shield they use to avoid seeing themselves. The board returned with their decision. Their voices carried a firm gentleness as they announced that Karen would be removed from her position as HOA chair effective immediately. Additionally, she would face restrictions preventing her from issuing warnings or fines in the future. A new oversight committee, one Ayla would help advise, would be established to ensure fairness moving forward. Karen exhaled sharply, her composure cracking. She didn't protest. She didn't argue. She simply absorbed the consequences, the reality settling into her like a weight she could no longer shift onto others. Justice had come quietly and completely. When we left the meeting room, sunlight warmed the concrete steps beneath our feet. A few neighbors approached us with soft smiles, their gratitude visible even if unspoken. For the first time since moving in, the air felt open, uncomplicated. Ayla walked beside me, her expression serene, her presence a steady anchor in the moment. She had endured humiliation, accusation, doubt, and met it all with clarity and strength. Her journey hadn't just changed the neighborhood. It had revealed something profound within her, something even I hadn't fully understood before, the depth of her resilience and the quiet power of her truth. That evening, our home felt different. The walls seemed lighter, the rooms warmer. The silence no longer held fear, it held peace. Ayla placed fresh flowers on the dining table, their soft scent filling the space with new meaning. As I watched her move through the house, I realized how close we had come to losing this sense of safety, how close we had come to letting someone else's bitterness shape our lives. But instead, truth had found its path. Not through confrontation, but through clarity. Not through anger, but through patience. And the home we feared losing had been won back with dignity. Later that night, as we stood on the porch watching the quiet street, Ayla looked out toward the neighborhood with a calm, steady gaze. The sky above us glowed faintly with starlight, the kind that appears only on nights when the world has settled after a long storm. Justice doesn't rush, she thought quietly. It arrives when it's ready. And she was right. Our story hadn't been about defeating someone. It had been about restoring what was meant to be fair. And as the breeze brushed gently past us, carrying the first signs of a peaceful future, I knew one thing with certainty: the truth had finally come home.